I also want to take a little time to talk about your story this week. So Sara's beat for several years now has basically been the military-industrial complex. And so you have a fascinating piece that calls back to the debates that the White House press corps was having with the White House early in the invasion, saying, "Where are the planes? Why are we not getting, these fighter jets? Why are we not getting these planes? Okay, if we can't give them their planes, give them the MiGs, and we'll give the planes to the Polish, and the Polish will give the MiGs to the Ukrainians."
Right. Why aren't we setting up no-fly zones?
Why aren't we setting up no-fly zones?
Zelensky and other Ukrainian officials have made so clear that what they believe they need the most is more warplanes and fighter jets. So why is the U.S. assessing something different? Why does the U.S. believe they know better what Ukraine needs than what Ukrainian officials are saying they need the most?
It sounds like, we're pretty dug in on our position when it comes to the no-fly zone, when it comes to the MiGs, despite this growing bipartisan call in Congress to shift a little bit. So, to put it bluntly, is Zelensky wasting his time tomorrow asking for these things?
President Zelensky is going to be speaking to Congress tomorrow. He's been pushing for fighter jets, a no-fly zone. You have to hear some of those same requests tomorrow as well. Has the administration shifted on that at all?
Though, calling for a no-fly zone. They're a NATO member. They share a border with Russia. How do we view their calls for a no-fly zone?
And on President Zelensky's address tomorrow, of course, he is expected to ask for more assistance, as my colleague noted. A lot of the U.S. positions on that haven't changed, as you just said, when it comes to the no-fly zone. But on the aircraft specifically, the Pentagon said last week that Secretary Austin said they do not support the transfer of additional fighter aircraft at this time. Is that still the United States' position?
Would a strike in Poland on supplies or anything really automatically be met with a military, forceful response, or simply a conversation amongst allies about how to respond?
There are reports that a Russian drone made its way into Polish airspace before going back to Ukraine and being shot down. Does a drone into Poland count?
Former ambassador to Ukraine, Maria Ivanovich, has been quite outspoken recently, and she said we need to mitigate risk, but it's also true that not taking greater action comes with a risk as well, because Putin is a bully and he only understands strength. Is the president showing enough strength against Putin? If Putin were to use chemical weapons, would it change the president's thinking when it comes to these MiGs, taking the no-fly zone off the table, but at least on this issue? Are you prepared? Can you give us any more details about what that threat means of severe consequences? The president obviously made the same threat last week. Is that purely economic consequences, or would there potentially be a military threat?
The answer from the White House was constantly, we don't want American forces and Russian forces in direct combat because that could lead to nuclear war. That feels like a pretty uncontroversial
Sure. You even had
statement.
Marco Rubio coming out and endorsing this, no-fly zone.
And that line is somewhat being held. But so you have a piece this week about a push by the military-industrial complex with the support of some elements of our political structure to say, okay, we can't do planes, we can't do fighter jets, we can't do MiGs. What about these things that are basically fighter jets, but they're unmanned?
Right.
So what are these Reaper drones?
Right. So Reaper drones, from the perspective of the military-industrial complex and the people that are very much in favor of sending fighter jets, they effectively can function very similarly. They can do mass surveillance. They can carry very intense air-to-ground weapons. And so if we can't get manned fighter jets to Ukraine, maybe we can try to get unmanned fighter jets.
How big are these things?
Yeah, they're much bigger than the Switchblade drones, the handheld backpack drones that we've sent, these kamikaze drones that have gained quite a bit of fame for being sent to Ukraine. This is a complete...
We're talking big missiles and the whole
Hellfire.
The whole thing.
They carry Hellfire missiles, which the U.S. has notoriously used, carried by MQ-9 Reapers to target or indiscriminately target people in Afghanistan, in Somalia, and they've been found to harm civilians. And now there's this effort to get them to Ukraine. And this would be a significant step up in the kinds of weapons that the U.S. has already sent and could be very provocative from the perspective of the Russians and potentially lead to that escalation that the Biden administration has been trying to avoid.
And so there's no American pilot in the cockpit. It's an unmanned drone, obviously. But who would man these or woman these?
Yeah, so the idea that's been put forth is that Ukrainian pilots could pilot
Like be
these
trained
drones.
to
Yes.
remotely?
Yes, so
Is that realistic?
So, you know, in the U.S., Air Force pilots have to have at least a year of training before they can fly Reapers. But General Atomics has said, well, we can expedite the training.
They're the
Look how
ones that make
motivated. They're the
right.
ones who make the Reapers. Look how motivated the Ukrainian forces have proved to be so far in the war. We can train them on a much faster timeline.
Also, lazy Americans, you need a year. But a motivated Ukrainian pilot.
Sure. And
How long do they say? Weeks?
I'm not sure that there's been a specific timeline, but, you know, I was speaking with a General Atomics spokesman who said, well, you know, before the State Department moves forward and approves this, while we're still in the negotiation phase, we could start training Ukrainian pilots now, which would be fairly unprecedented also for the way that these kinds of deals move forward. So, you know, there's certainly this effort. We've seen the press, you know, kind of beckon the administration. Are you going to move forward and do this? We've seen several think tankers that are backed by General Atomics, the maker of the Reaper, argue in the media that the U.S. should be sending MQ-9s. We had Adam Kinzinger and a few other Democrat lawmakers send letter to the Secretary of Defense asking, well, what kind of timeline could we train the Ukrainian pilots on?
And the business side here is fascinating because, as you describe in your story, this company is bit on the rocks, which to me is pathetic. Like, how are you a weapons maker in the United States and you're not turning a profit? Like, come on. And the clowns from War Dogs managed to get themselves rich. So this is their like prized baby. Like, and how much is one of these things? You said $300 million or something?
Oh, well, so one individual aircraft can go for about at least 30 million.
Like 30 million.
But then there's also all of the maintenance and operational support and all of the structure that goes with it, which adds exponentially onto it.
Like when you're at the Toyota dealer and they're like, yeah, the sticker price is here, but if you want it,
Exactly. So
if you want it to actually work.
So these are incredibly expensive, which just goes to show that if the U.S. were to approve a sale or a leasing agreement with the Ukrainians, I mean, the U.S. government would basically have to be involved in funding this. So General Atomics has had frustration over the years because the U.S. has a very strict export policy about who.
We're not letting just anybody buy these.
We're not just letting anyone buy MQ-9 Reapers. I mean, essentially up until the Trump administration, it was understood only NATO allies could have these because they're dangerous weapons. They can carry very sophisticated, very dangerous missiles and be used in mass surveillance. And so during the Trump administration, as part of its effort to broaden U.S. arms sales abroad, they eased this export policy.
Who started getting them?
So the UAE was approved, which is...
Sure, they'll act responsibly.
Which is obviously a very big step up. Taiwan, which is a big step up.
No problem.
And so, you know, General Atomics very much is in favor of continuing to allow more and more countries to access naturally,
you know.
Sure. So, you know, they see Lockheed Martin making a ton of money selling their fighter jets to all different countries abroad. Why shouldn't they have the ability?
Right.
And so there's this big fight going on the Hill and in the administration, this big lobbying effort to ease export policy to allow these exports to occur. So this question about whether this effort to allow the Ukrainians to have access to the MQ-9s is occurring within this broader effort to ease export policy.
Which feels inevitable. The idea that you're going to create these massively expensive weapon systems and then you're going to restrict who you're going to sell them to. Obviously you should, but there's just so much pressure to push against that. And Ken, how does this fit into the reporting that you've done on kind of the arms sales and Middle East politics.
Yeah, so in my reporting, I focus on what's called the ISR. It stands for, it's like the reconnaissance.
Intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance.
Yeah, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. It's this fleet of aircraft from the AWACS to all sorts of different things they use to, it's pretty amazing what their capabilities are. They can peer deep inside of Ukraine from outside of the border, the idea being that, we're not going to go in Ukraine to avoid becoming labeled a belligerent, but we're going to work from outside of it and then pass intelligence onto the Ukrainians that they're able to gather. And so these is this sort of presence that Biden has had since not even day one, since before day one. They've been operating at the border, collecting intelligence, passing things
One way
along.
they were accurately able to say, hey, there's 125,000 Russian troops
Exactly.
on the border here. They weren't guessing.
Exactly.
They
And
were
if you
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
if you look at the earnings calls for some of these corporations like Lockheed, this is an area of focus for them that they identified as a growth sector going forward. Because, as Sara said earlier, not just are you deploying these things, but you need to maintain them, which can be very
The
expensive.
maintenance contracts are often the bigger source of revenue than even the initial sale.
Exactly. And that's something I didn't realize until investigating this kind of thing, just how much money is involved in these things on a sustained basis, not even just a one-off thing.
Yeah, and if you look at Northern Virginia and the suburbs of Maryland, like you see where that money has stayed.
Right.
Like you can just map the kind of housing prices and the development out there. Great reporting, both of you, Sara Sirota, Ken Klippenstein, and for everybody watching. Thanks for watching Breaking Points, and also I think this is funded. I think you could ask Sagar; he knows all the details, by the people who donate to contribute to Breaking Points. So thank you for doing that. If you want to support our journalism, you can go to theintercept.com. And it won't be hard to find how to donate there. We badger people relentlessly on the site. I think the actual site is theintercept.com/give. But as soon as you go to our site, we're like, please help us. We were funded years ago, 2014, by a billionaire, but he's not around forever. And you don't necessarily want to always be funded by a billionaire.
Yeah.
And so, because it takes away your ability to be independent, and independent media is extremely important. So thank you guys again for joining us, and thank you guys for watching.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.